Hello, and welcome to the So Emotional podcast. Here on the cast, we discuss everything emotions through the lens of attachment, the nervous system, and internal parts work. We're a little irreverent and like to have fun exploring the emotional issues and dynamics that interest us. So come along and hang out. Let's explore the fascinating lands of emotions. Do this.
Hi, welcome to the So Emotional podcast. I'm Angela Wetzel with Epic Initiator Coaching. We also have Nick Carl here with the Safe Anchor Somatic Coach. And our special guest today is Carmela Napoli. And she is a Jungian analytical consultant using a Myers-Briggs framework.
Damn.
And I will turn it over to you, Carmela, to let you explain more about
Whoa. We want to know about Carmela, right?
Well, yeah, that's why I'm turning it over to her to tell her to let her explain what she does, and then we're gonna.
Okay.
Yeah. We got it. Go.
Okay. So I think the first question was how did I fall into this whole thing? So I basically was living my life doing what I thought I was supposed to be doing. I finally hit a point where I was looking for something for somebody else, and I just happened across this, I guess, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator thing. And it like resonated so hard with me, and I originally tested wrong, but the fact that it gave you a pattern of understanding yourself to such an extent, because I think because I never felt like I belonged in my family, and I just always felt like something was off, nobody understood me, there was like this big disconnect with all of that, that this really made, like, reading the profile really rang true. And once I finally typed accurately, and it just, I don't know, I went from there. Like, I literally became obsessed, kept digging. And then when I'd come across like a nuance, I couldn't understand why I was like an outlier myself versus the profile. And then as I dug deeper and deeper, I realized there's a lot of more nuances and complexities to the system that most people don't actually know about. And it explains all of those nuances basically. And then I realized it's an actual really effective tool for self-discovery, development, growth, and then interacting with other people, and having better relationships and a better relationship with yourself. So
you mentioned being not feeling connected or as a part of your family.
yeah, I just felt like I didn't belong. Like I just felt like so out of place.
What about not in regards to your family, but just out in the world, like being in your own skin? Did you feel growing up?
Well, I felt okay in my skin, but I definitely felt judged. Like, school was very traumatic for me. Because I just didn't think like everybody else, and I was a huge tomboy as a kid, which is I guess a weird thing for being a female. And my type's really rare as a female, so that explains that conundrum. But you'd probably be a really good example of this. I come across a lot of people who are feeler type males, and they seem to have a really hard time in society because they don't fit the conventional standard paradigm of what a strong thinking logic based male is supposed to be. So they kind of have to like hide the real them to not be ridiculed and like ostracized from society or their families.
I feel like there's like, at least for me, there's very much like two sides, right? There's like the man mask I put on and I go out and I'm good at
But it's a
acting that way.
mask, right? It's a persona.
No, absolutely. Like,
Yeah.
There's very much an outer circle and an inner circle about who actually gets to know me and what I actually care about. But it's so natural now because I've done it for so long. It's just.
But what that does is it actually inhibits your development in the way that I think you're supposed to develop. And then you learn like coping mechanisms and traits that kind of hijack really getting to know yourself, and then being able to tap your actual like tools and gifts in the best way. And that's what's so interesting, because it's like, if you really, and I'm actually an example of this, where I was basically forced to conform into a more traditionalist type role when I'm actually like a freedom seeking creator type.
Right.
So that was really repressive. And when I discovered that, like, my first thing when I found that out was I worked a 9 to 5 government job, and I switched to 10-hour days, and I took Wednesdays off. So I'd be 2 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on. And it was like the best thing ever. Because just having that little break to have that constant change was just a game changer for me.
But even that idea about being just like untethered from a very sort of typical schedule or an idea of how life has gone, right? Like, I mean, that seems like pretty profound, isn't it, though?
No, it was huge for me. Absolutely huge. It was so liberating. My mom's another really good example. My mom's a really rare intuitive type, and she's like, I always use the example of her being like the Einstein quote, the fish in the forest. And if you judge that fish by its ability to climb a tree, then like you're going to assume it's broken. But she literally needs to be in an ocean, whereas she's trying to smash herself into this like conventional system of being in a forest, and she just doesn't. So she's felt broken, she's felt misunderstood, she's felt like something was wrong with her, she's prone to depression, she has no self-esteem. I mean, she's got all sorts of stuff going on with her psychologically because of basically being rejected from day one because she's not quote normal.
Mm.
And I will tell you, when I figured out her type, I realized that she's very similar to a lot of other of that same type. And what I had her do was get on Facebook and just join a couple groups of that same type. And she literally like, I think she ended up crying to me and just saying that she never realized that there's nothing wrong with her, that she actually, everybody that's in there think similarly. They're all like compassionate in the way that she's compassionate. They have similar interests. They have similar humor. Like I absolutely love watching her start reading some of the stuff they post and just giggling like an idiot. And it's stuff like I read. I'm just like, it just doesn't do anything for me. But like for her, it just really resonates. So it's like, I think that was a massive gift for her, just realizing like she's not broken. There's
Have
nothing
you
wrong with her.
have you ever had have you ever now that you know your type and you like understand yourself more, have you met other of your type?
So I kind of did something similar to my mom where I went in and I actually found a female ISTP type group
Okay.
for myself. And
Yeah.
that was really interesting. And we all kind of have a similar story. Our humor's jacked up in like our own way type deal. Um, and again, being a female as a T type is pretty rare in itself. So like a lot of us had parents that were trying to force us to conform to be normal females, being like dutiful house, like housewife, like I don't know, just more sociable, into shopping, a lot of the stuff that typical females are into, and we're into like sports and crafting and like miter saws and working on cars and like it's just not, yeah, it's not normal. Like again, normal. So it's really interesting seeing other people talk about that. I will actually say that I have, I'm not a social person, but I will say that recently I have found two females who are my extroverted counterpart, which means we actually have the same thought process, it's just in a slightly different order. And I just had dinner with the one girl tonight, and it is literally like what I was thinking about doing. She's like, I 100% would do that too. She's like, but I have to basically like dumb myself down to not be seem overbearing to like normal people because we're like 0 to 100 when we get excited. Like,
Right.
for example, instead of going out to eat for dinner, I literally would have just showed up at her house with like takeout. Like that's usually a step too far for people, but for us, like we get so excited that we just go above and beyond and like kind of end up kind of creeping people out with our extremism. So I don't know. It's just really funny how
So when you
just
go, when you want to take a Myers-Briggs test, it's like it's 50 questions or 100 questions or something like that, right? And that's about your personality, correct?
it is, but I think it's only 1 in 5 people actually test accurately. And it's because as you age, you actually develop other functions that can change your type output. And if you take those tests with the idea of how you were in your childhood, you're more likely to test accurately. But there's a better way to figure out what kind of type you are. And if you've ever looked at the Myers-Briggs system, it's like there's 16 types. If you think it have been a grid system of 4 and 4, um, David Kiersey, I guess, came up with similarities across like each one of the 4 is kind of in its own category that has similar traits. So, for example, going horizontally, you have the intellectual types, which when you meet them, they stand out like a sore thumb because they basically pride themselves on not showing emotion in their face. Like they're hilarious. They're very just like kept together, and they like pride themselves on their ability to like stay rooted in logic. So like they're very non-expressive emotionally. Then you have the idealists, which usually when you talk to somebody, you really get an idea. Like idealists to me again stand out like a sore thumb because they're very idealistic. They're dreamers. They believe in like what could be the possibilities of things, stuff that's not exactly in reality. Then you have the guardians, and they sound exactly like they do. Like I call them also the traditionalists, but they're not all traditionalists, but they do kind of have that aura of guarding, protecting, abiding by laws, creating laws. Like they're kind of like the guards of the different types. And then the very last row is the artisans. And I'm an artisan, freedom-based creator. We're out there face deep in stuff. Freedom is literally what we seek. If we have any type of rules, we freak out. Whereas a guardian, if you tried to give them too much freedom, they like literally don't feel comfortable without having like rules and an order to do things. It's the complete opposite. So if you can figure out somebody's temperament, that narrows it down to 4 types from 16.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's another, so if that's the horizontal. So if you actually go vertically, this lady named Linda Berens figured out that there's a similar categorizing going in the vertical direction, and she called that interaction styles. I think she argues that these are easier to see than the temperaments because it's how you interact and you notice how people interact with you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can figure out which category you're in that and figure out which temperament you are, where they intersect gives you 1 type.
Right. Yeah. That's it.
So yeah, you literally, I think that's an easier way to narrow down than.
What are the 4 interaction styles?
So the 4 interaction styles are charting the course. They basically they like to plan, they like to create like I guess at least a rough outline of type stuff. I'm one of those, even though I'm a P type, which is more flexible. So like I like to have a general outline and then I kind of wing it as I go, but I like to have that idea of where I'm headed.
Right.
Then you have the behind the scenes type. They to me stand out like a sore thumb because they're usually the ones that are quiet. You can like just tell that they're more reserved, they stand off, like they just seem to have a lot more internally going on. I
Sure.
think behind the scenes really describes them very well. My mom's one of those. And then you have the in charge types, which are completely the opposite of behind the scenes, and they're like in your face, they initiate, they have like this external control, they're very quick to act a lot of times before thinking things through and then have to redo things because they're literally just focused on getting stuff done fast. And then you have the starter types. They start things, but they're not as aggressive as the in charge types, but they have a really hard time like seeing stuff through and finishing anything. They just start and start and start and start and start, and they're more people and just like involvement or orchestrated versus the in charges are more like commanding.
Right.
So it's like you have the different flavors of those two.
So Angela's type is INFJ, and so
so if you use the model of the temperaments, she would fall into the idealist category, which I can definitely see myself. That she has this like humanity is the focus, where she believes in just this better world. I would call that like an idealist type thing. And then she's a chart the course type.
Say more about the chart the course type. I see
So
it responds, directs, movement, and progress. Needs to make action plans, focused energy, deliberate decisions.
yeah, the chart the course types are very deliberate. Like I'm very deliberate, even though most people see my action, my like in the moment moving. But they don't see all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes.
So in this chart the course type of personality that I have, from the very beginning of our podcast, I was thinking about asking for a framework for our listeners so they could understand what MBTI was, so they could hop in and have that framework to be like, what are we talking about? Who is this? What does she do? So that's where my brain went automatically, and that's probably probably something to do with that.
You're
Because
charting the course.
without that, I'm like, no one has any context, or and I'm also thinking about our listeners and the audience about what they're going to take away from our conversation. So I'm wanting to include our audience members in the conversation that we're having. So, they have an understanding of that. So it's like all those elements are there.
But it's funny because like my 2 brothers and my dad are all in charge types, and it's like they literally just jump into action. They don't like to create a plan. They like to just wing it. And it's like,
yeah, so that's interesting. So okay, so the people who the chart the course the in charge people, what is that top line? What's the characterization of this whole designation of the vertical?
The interaction styles?
Interaction styles.
Yeah.
How different interaction styles interact with each other, right?
Yeah. It's fascinating. So my mom is a behind the scenes type. My dad and my two brothers are in charge types, and she's had a very stressful, traumatizing existence being in that household with those extreme energies of my siblings and my dad. So that's been very eye-opening now realizing that's a thing. And like the behind the scenes type, they like to take it as slow as possible to make sure that they get the best outcome possible, whereas the in charge types are literally just trying to force action, force action, force action, force action. And you see how that stresses out, or each type stresses out the other types, like the way they interact. So it's interesting watching those dynamics output. And I've had to interject multiple times to try to at least get the in charge types to realize my mom's the one that's different. And if they want a specific thing from her, they can't approach it, or they have to just accept the way that that's the way she functions. Um, I'm a lot better at going with the flow with my in charge siblings because I'm a tactician. I can just kind of assimilate. But there are times where I just shake my head. I'm just like, if we would have planned a little bit better, we wouldn't have had to do this 3 times. But whatever. So
Well, I can remember taking the Myers-Briggs, when I was a kid at some point, and really the only thing I took away from it was just the dichotomy between introversion and extroverted, That's like,
yeah,
oh,
most people really get hung up on that.
yeah, well, it just seems like, oh yeah, I guess I'm an introvert, but that's as far as it went. As I've sort of dug in here in the last couple of days, sort of looking at this stuff,
Oh, it's so deep. It's so much deeper than
it's
just those.
ridiculously deep, and there's so much more there. And just thinking about, the temperament styles versus the interaction styles, like super, super cool. And that you can, if you can kind of categorize yourself in one way or another, either by taking a test or by getting a feel for the general places, like what the temperaments are or what the interaction styles are, because you can kind of suss that out a little bit from just what you like.
Yeah, and if you know the different temperaments and you know the different interaction styles, you can type people you come across pretty quick, or at least get a general idea of how they function. And then it can really improve the way you interact with them to get like a more positive outcome or more positive interaction versus like butting heads. So it's like you may need to chameleon yourself a little bit, like just in a circumstance type deal, but like it's a tool you can use to literally improve your relationships. It can improve your understanding of your spouses. Like I've actually used this system to help two of my friends like get through marital issues. Like they were both on the brink of divorce because they literally just didn't understand the other person. And I
Right.
like when I told them how the other person was thinking and processing and feeling and like going through this whole thing, they were like just blown away. And I'm like, you guys have been together for like, I don't know how many years before you actually got married. And then you've been married
Right.
for 2 years and you still like, you don't even know this. I don't know. I found that so interesting. But it really helped a lot. And I think one of them actually told me that I got more progress with them in just like one conversation than they had going to therapy. So I thought
Mhm.
that was just mind boggling in itself. So I don't know.
The other dimension of what is here in this information inside of Myers-Briggs was the idea of cognitive functions. And so the bases of cognitive functions are like the information that comes into your being and into your body, and then how you are uh how your relationship is with those things, and is it internal, external, and that's thinking, feeling, the sensation, and then your intuition were sort of the four.
So essentially what that is, those are the categories that Jung discovered as I think he called them cognitive processes that he noticed with the patients that he was working with. He
Right.
noticed that there was a difference of, I guess, behavior, which like led him to realize there was a commonality of thought process behind that. Well, what happens is you innately have a specific programming that has those neural pathways in a specific design. And then as you experience the world after you're born, you start to have like notice you have a preference for those different functions. And then you'll gravitate towards specific tasks and environments and just areas that allow you to exercise those specific functions. And then how that happens, so then your order of preference basically is what determines your personality type, because the personality type code is actually a decoder ring for the order of those cognitive functions.
Right.
And you basically use them all. It's just your order of preference and your strength of each one that gives you the habits and behaviors that naturally develop based on those preferences. So it's a really well thought out system. It's really interesting. And then you can actually know when somebody is a specific type, but they're not functioning or they weren't developed the way that they should have been in the order. Like they have like key traits too that at least I've noticed are really noticeable, where they got hung up because of environment, and like that's a growth potential for them to actually like get back in alignment with themselves and deal with, I guess, usually an identity crisis that tends to happen with those people. I went through it myself.
So
So,
where did
and
the MBTI start? Where did it start out? What was the purpose of it? Like, why should people use it? Why should people take the test?
um well, Jung was just doing it, I guess, for patient stuff. But when Isabel Myers and Catherine Briggs got a hold of Jung's research or integrated it with what they were already working on, they created the actual dichotomy system and the letters as we know them today, um, because they saw the usefulness of relating it to real people, real normal people who weren't like mentally deranged, like what Jung was working with. And they needed a tool like that during World War II when the men went away to war and the women were all left to take over the men's jobs. So they used this system to personality type people to figure out which jobs that would be best suited for them, and it worked. And they've actually then built and wrote a book and like went on and started teaching this stuff, and they've helped a lot of people like work through a lot of different like areas of their lives using this system. It's got a lot of practical applications.
Cool.
cool. So in the cognitive function stack, all right, this is like your go-to
It's
things
like
to
your
lean.
tool. It's like you have a
Your
set of tools,
right.
and like you use them specifically in the order of preference, or you've learned over time through environment that certain functions are best in specific situations.
Right. So of these
So
16 types, they also fall into the basic tool set that they have for internally working through the just how life comes at them and what tools they go through first. So like for what's Angela's top tool?
So Angela's top tool or cognitive function is internal intuition.
So
And so the
so
intuition and the sensing function are both perceiving functions, because you need a way to take in data or look at specific data that has nothing to do with like making a decision at that point. You're literally just taking in data, you're analyzing. And then your judgment function is how you actually take that data and you make decisions on it. So everybody needs that balance of perceiving and judging. And then you need so back to the introvert extrovert designation, you need a function that works internally and you need functions that work externally. So each
mhm,
ego type has 4 functions: a perceiving function that's internalized, a perceiving function that's externalized, a judgment function that's externalized, and a judgment function that's internalized. It's all in balance. So it's actually it's a very, I call it beautiful. I think it's a beautiful system. The symmetry of it is amazing.
right.
So back to Angela. So her dominant function is internal intuition, which basically intuition is a sixth sense, or looking beyond the tangible data that is in front of you. It is reading between the lines. It's looking through stuff behind the curtain to the meaning behind it, and like extrapolating patterns and recognition. You're not actually looking at a green apple. You're looking at like where the apple might have come from, like why the apple was shaped the way that it is. Like you're looking at the non-tangible aspects of that apple. And then her second function is
Wait,
extrovert.
Angela, do you think that that jives with your perception of your own tool set?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when I was probably like 6 or 7 years old, I remember actually at one of our family reunions, we were playing spoons and I ran outside and I was like, I felt so, because I ended up eating the spoon because I lost the card game and it was like so nasty. They had like put all kinds of salt and pepper and just like it was disgusting.
Yeah, that game was
And
terrible.
I,
That game was terrible.
yeah, it's a terrible game. So I remember running outside and just being like, I had this feeling of wanting to like punish people with my absence or have people worry about where I was or, for me to be upset and be pursued. And I just remember watching myself and being like, why am I doing this? Like, what exactly is going on here? And I don't know that that's like a normal thing that a child does that starts to observe their own behavior and wonder what the patterns are behind like what they're doing. But
That's dominant NI or
so
or
so
internalized
that's like
intuition.
exactly what I started doing at a really young age. And then I started watching my parents. I started watching my siblings. Like I watch people to see what they're doing. And I'm very curious about what is the driving force behind the behaviors that people have.
Yeah, the patterns and the patterns
Yeah,
of the
I'm always
patterns.
watching for patterns. I notice I have like a giant web of information. I connect this to this, so I know how things interplay. So
And
yeah,
typically, I mean, like so this will be a hallmark of an INFJ. If you're an INFJ, this is like your
Like
go-to tool.
patterns are your baby, like
Yeah.
patterns of the
yeah,
patterns.
that's true. I'm a patterns person.
My boyfriend is also a dominant internal intuition user, but he's the T type. And he was trying to explain, it's like the hardest one, I think, to explain because it's so subconscious based that you'll take in data and you'll see these patterns and you can't necessarily explain how you got to the conclusions that you got through those patterns. You just like subconsciously recognize that there is a pattern. Back in the day, like they considered the like oracles and the mages, or probably mage isn't probably the right word, but like the oracles and the shamans of the tribes were probably dominant internal intuition types because they just had this internal knowing of things. And it was because their perceiving function was doing all this data and pattern recognition internally,
Yeah.
subconsciously. And then they're just like, aha, it's the aha function. When you have that moment of aha, but you don't really know why, but it just clicked randomly. That's internal intuition, like at its finest.
Yeah. And like it's true. Sometimes I don't know why I know certain things, but I'm like, I know something. I can't tell you how I know, but it just comes from it. And I think you're right. There is
Yeah,
so much
there's
going,
that's the only function
so
that's
much
really,
information.
really connected from the or subconscious.
And
Mhm.
what's her second function?
So her second function is external feeling, and how with that's I think they also call it the harmony function. But when you were talking about the game of spoons and you said you want these people to feel like my absence or feel bad or feel whatever,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's your awareness of the collective or the other people's feelings. So it's externalized. Versus an internal feeler is more focused on like how they feel, not necessarily what anybody else is feeling. An external feeler is definitely looking for external feedback of emotion to gauge and make the decision that they're doing.
Mhm.
And what's the third one?
So her third function is internal thinking, which is actually my dominant function, and that's they call that one the accuracy function. Basically, that's truth bombing in the position that it's in. It can actually come across as very like childish and harsh randomly, out of nowhere, because your type's usually a lot more sensitive and friendly and whatever. But it's like when you have those
Mhm.
moments where you just like truth bomb somebody, like, whoa, where the heck did that come from? Uh,
Yeah. I
Or
almost feel
when
like
she
that's
needs to wield it.
like a trickster thing, or it's kind of funny because like I remember this is a maybe an illustration of that. So when I was in basic training, I think I come across as like very sweet and kind and like maybe you can like pick on me, right? Like maybe Angela's a pushover because she's so sweet. Well, this one girl in basic training decided she was gonna like pick on me and make a joke at my expense. So I just hit her with some truth bombs and it was ended up very bad for her because I didn't hold anything back. And I've noticed that part of me can be extremely mean, but I've learned to not do that. But I did it in my, I would say, like late teens, early 20s. I definitely made a lot of people cry. But it
yeah,
was mostly because if they came after me, I would use it as a defense strategy, but I never would lead with that.
yeah, and that's the point. It's the third preference, or you saw that was an applicable situation to like shut the situation down. But that's an undeveloped version of that, those like very harsh truth bombs. And I went through that as a younger kid, and then just I mean, I was still a lot more harsh, but that was like my dominant go-to was just me being harsh and truth bombing like all the time, versus using it applicability or specifically for a situation like the way you just explained. Like that was my go-to for everything. And I was known as that arrogant, like know-it-all, whatever, when somebody decided to talk to me and I actually responded. But most of the time I kept to myself. So unless they engaged me, like they didn't really have to know what I was thinking.
What was the fourth function?
So her fourth function is external sensing. And how that presents is so external sensing is basically living in the five senses, living in the moment, being extremely focused on the experience that is being given to others, what your surroundings are. A lot of SE users like to appear really well dressed because it's the experience that they're exuding. I find a lot of SE users have very like colorful dress, colorful homes. I feel like they're the ones that like to decorate like in a showy kind of way.
You said
They're the
SE. What's SE?
external sensing.
And they abbreviate it SE?
Yeah.
Okay.
SE. It's the
Okay.
sensing with the E, like the extroverted version behind it. So all the
Okay.
little letters.
Okay. Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that the J or which letter is that? Because I feel like it's kind of weird because you have the letters, but then when you go
So
into it, they like switch everything around and it's
so
like a new code. And now there's like a little E or an I next to it. So it's introverted, extroverted. So it's like,
so the J on the end of a type code actually signifies that the judging function is externalized, meaning in the four functions that you present, the top two, your T or your F is going to be externalized. And your I means that you lead with the introvert function. So your judgment external function is actually second, which is where the FE, that's why the FE is second and your intuition is first.
okay, so it really is a code. Got it.
It is a code. I mean, they've noticed some parallels with J users. Like I used to joke when I was at work that like you could walk up the aisle and tell who was a J and who was a P based on how clean their desk was. And like 100% accuracy. It was like J, P, J, P. It was really funny. Like most of the P's had
So
like
my
very
desk is kind of cluttered. So I know.
cluttered, messy, like disarray. Like the picture of Einstein with these like piles of crap everywhere.
Yeah.
Einstein's a total P user. And like
P.
J users literally. Now, where that allegedly stems from is the fact that J users like to have organization in their external environment so they can have freedom internal. Whereas P users like to have internal organization, which I can tell you with my systems and my brain logic and all the folders and stuff I got going on, that's 100% for me. But it's so that we can have external freedom to just like tra la la or do whatever the heck we feel like doing.
Right. Okay.
So it doesn't hold true for everybody because I've noticed that your interaction style can also hijack that a little bit. Like I know an INTP who she's a P obviously, but because she's a behind the scenes, they like to have that perfectionism control thing. And she's actually a very cleanly. Now she very well could be sitting in her shadow type, which is an ENTJ, and they're like hardcore in control. So it kind of just depends.
Right.
What would throw her into her shadow type? Could that be like trauma or how does
So trauma can do it. It can also be if you're raised in an environment where your ego is not well received, and as a coping mechanism you basically have to develop one of the other sides of your mind, which would include your shadow. I feel like I had to have that happen because my shadow is a guardian type and my dad is a in charge guardian type, and he really pushed the whole tradition convention, follow the guidebook, go to school, go to college, get a job, get a house, yada yada yada. And
Die.
I really felt like I had to do that. And now looking at the cognitive functions, I can tell that my internal sensing function, which is essentially that function of loyal, dutiful, follow the rules, basically, is pretty overdeveloped for my normal development pattern.
But this is kind of weird because you could have people kind of interacting as guardians, but it's their shadow types. So then they're enforcing other rules based off of their shadow, and they're not even being authentic. So
Well,
Yeah.
which I think is one of the reasons why it's hard to type people, because if they're just all kinked up and clogged up and they're like living in these shadows and stuff, it could be pretty hard to get
right.
into like what they are
Yeah.
actually suited for, right?
Well, and if you live as that chameleon or that alternate type there for that long, you kind of like
Become it.
repress your actual
Yeah.
identity, your true identity with that persona mask. And like you kind of lose yourself. And then you'll start to notice that you have these internal incongruencies with what you believe, but what you think you believe. And I actually think that might be the stem of a lot of cognitive dissonances that people have.
Right.
So it very well could be like type development issues or like not developing in a specific order that's the healthiest for your type.
Yeah. So this was my other question. People that are like taking the test, and my guess is most people aren't really actively using MBTI. But what
Probably
is
not.
the
Well,
best
when I
way?
was on YouTube, there was tons of people making tons of videos that were
It's
not that old.
it's really starting to take
Is
off
it now? Okay.
Yeah.
because people are starting to realize there's more to the system and they're starting to actually realize that it's useful. Because I think the
So
reason they didn't use it for so long is because they were like, oh, that's nice. You have a profile. Not everything fits. Is this really applicable? Probably not. Oh, it's just nice. Like I know
yeah,
a lot of jobs that made you test it, but then they didn't really, or if it didn't resonate because you tested wrong, you really didn't have applicability of it. So I think it
yeah.
kind of got poo-pooed off as like something that didn't work or it wasn't, but it's because they don't really understand the full depth of like how to actually type accurately. Then typing accurately is where you really get the most use out of it, and
So
then
then my
understanding all the
question,
facets.
so then my question is, how does a person type accurately? It's probably not just by taking the test by themselves.
No, I've stood over a couple people and helped them walk through the questions because I've noticed a lot of people read the questions wrong or they don't know how to use this. I would actually think that TE like blind spot people. Oh my god, I was standing over an ISFJ that was taking the test and he tested as an INTJ and like the spectrum. And I was like, okay, so you have, the five bubbles, you have the neutrals in the middle. And he's like, well, I'm this, but I'm this. I was like, well, if you're more this means you have to be on that side of the spectrum. And he's like, oh. And I was like, really? So I don't know. Like it was just so funny to me. I was like, oh my God. Or like again, as a male F type, like he didn't want to admit that he actually cared about what other people felt. And I was like, really? I see the behavior.
Right.
Like you're lying to yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Is some
Yeah. So
people,
that's part of it. If a
yeah,
person is lying to themselves or they're caught up in one of their functions, then
yeah,
it is actually like illustrating how people become lost in the world in a way, because like the test is in a way like their process of taking the test is showing their functions, but they may
because
not
they're
be able
answering, but
to,
because they're answering questions for the other type to pop up, they're
right,
not actually
not
getting,
seeing what they're doing.
yeah.
That's really interesting.
And then you have like people like the ENTPs, which are basically the devil's advocate type. They will take the test and they try to break the test when they take it. Like they like try to get a different answer every time they take it. I'm just like, oh my god, right there's a key red flag that you're an ENTP. Like it's absolutely hilarious.
So funny. It's like the test needs an algorithm that if you keep trying to do that, it's like you're an ENTP because you're trying to break the system.
It probably should. It is really funny. I've actually had two people do that. I'm just like, oh my god, you're ridiculous. Or you get
So,
the ENFP, which they're like, well, I'm a chameleon. I can fit in anything. I'm like, well, right there, you're probably an ENFP. And then she's like, how did you know this? I'm like, because I just told you why. Oh,
so
too
this was
funny.
a question based off that one. Is it nurture or nature? Like, do we come in with some of this hardwiring, or how would you describe that?
So I know this is a very heavily debated question, and reading Isabel Myers' information in her book, she really does believe that you have innate coding.
Mhm.
And I think Nardi actually also did actually hooked your brain up to I can't remember the things that make the screen light up. CT scan,
Yeah.
I know it's like those
MRI,
little
whatever it is.
nodes that they
Yeah.
put
But
on your
he
head.
literally found out that specific tasks will light up a cognitive function specified area in the brain, and you can actually type somebody by showing which one tends to light up the most and specific patterns of brain lighting up He
Mhm.
actually he actually created specific patterns for each different type based on the cognitive functions. Because
Hmm.
he noticed some people would have to switch and it was harder for them to do that specific task, or they only wanted to do that specific task for a short period because it was one of their non-developed functions, or it was a task where they could choose their own function, and those were the ones that really indicated like their preferences. So it's actually a really fascinating read. But so they're theorizing that it's an innate coding, and then as you engage with the environment, it becomes more entrenched and ingrained. And then if that system gets hijacked by then a specific like coping mechanism that forces you out of that, that's why I think people have those identity crises, because if you're forced to develop as a different type, you
Mhm.
have that under, like, you have that subconscious knowing that something's wrong with you because
Mm.
you're not who you are. You're not who
Right.
you were coded to be.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I know exactly what that feels like because I went through it myself. It was traumatizing, honestly.
What did that feel like?
Um, like you feel so alone. Like you don't even understand yourself. You can't understand why nobody gets you. You feel broken. You're like, why am I here? Like something has to be messed up. Like was I born into the right family? Like
Mm.
you just have a lot of like self-doubt issues because you just don't, like, something's not right and you can't figure out what it is, because it's like you don't realize what's happening is your unconscious is thinking a certain way, but your programmed consciousness based on your environment is trying to force you to think a different way, and you have that polarization internally going on, and that causes such internal chaos.
So
It's frustrating.
I think that I, in my life, had a situation like that, except when I did it, my way of doing it was to externalize all that. So I just hated everybody. And I was just
Yeah,
like, these people are just
idiots.
Mm.
idiots. Right.
Yeah,
And
I
and
had
I
that
wanted
too.
them all to die. Right. That's what I imagined all the time, you know. I wanted them to drive off a bridge and then I was going to be happy, which is like,
Wow,
you know, like,
that's pretty villainous.
well, yeah. But I
I
imagine
think,
that's probably part of my type. Like that's probably baked into that type there somewhere too, about
yeah,
how,
internal feeler users can be very vindictive.
yeah,
I would say that probably falls in the vindictive category.
yeah,
My boyfriend has that function as his child, and he has this black book of retaliation, like people he's gonna exact
yeah,
revenge upon. It's,
right.
it's absolutely
You're gonna
hilarious.
get theirs.
Well, and he's a puppet master, so he's like, they may hit them 10 years from now, and they won't even know it was me.
Right.
I'm like, oh my God.
And
But like, I
you
know
won't
for
know when.
me, I definitely had some external stuff, and the way my type presents, like, this is absolutely hilarious. But what happened to me was I basically like sensory went into a hedonism, like risk seeking spiral where I was like drinking, drugs, like sex addict, like anything I could get my hands on to like numb, I guess, the fact that like I hated myself because I wasn't allowed to be myself. And
Mm.
then if I would get into an argument with somebody, like I literally got off on making them feel stupid. So it's like that is my dominant function. Like actually that's my shadow, externalizing and basically making people feel dumb because they made me feel like broken, not accepted. So
Mm.
yeah, that's again not a healthy way to be. And God, if I could have put, if I had anybody helping me, well, maybe we should segue to this. My, I have a nephew, and I was curious to see how this would actually work with children. And I was able to type him at 1 year old. At least I had him narrowed down to like two different types. And the next time I saw him, they don't live close, so I didn't get to see him on a regular basis. I'm sure I probably could have been more conclusive sooner than the 2 year mark. But I saw noticeable preferences at the age of 1. So we were just talking about the innate brain wiring. Like you can't tell me at the age of 1 having those preferences like presented isn't showing that there's like some kind of innate thing going on. Like it's just fascinating. And
Yeah.
like I already know him being an F male type, he's gonna struggle with some acceptance. And I can already see right now my brother is, I think he's a little disappointed that he's not a crybaby because he is very sensitive and whiny and delicate in certain aspects. And I think he is kind of disappointed that he's not more like,
Boisterous and
well, not boisterous, but like tougher, I think.
As a 1-year-old, 2-year-old, which I think is a funny concept, but
I,
I think I can
but you know what
imagine
I
what that is.
but you
Yeah,
know what I mean. Like I
absolutely.
think he's
Absolutely.
scared that he's gonna be rejected, and like it's a valid concern, to be honest.
Right.
It's a
Hmm.
very valid concern. But if he nurtures him to like think that that's wrong with him, he's gonna go through some stuff himself. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But yeah,
I'd be interested because I know that in the first 1,000 days, so in the developmental stuff that I've read, it's honestly the first 1,000 days are like absolutely critical. Babies are not born with the autonomic control of their nervous system. They actually can't control their sympathetic parts of their brain. They actually need another person to regulate their nervous
uh-huh.
system for them, right?
Yep.
Which then implants, like it is like a software download into their being as it actually
Yes.
functionally develops. Their brain
And
actually develops, right?
and if those parents don't do that, they really don't know how to deal with their emotions.
Right. Well, you got to think about how many people have well-developed,
Emotions.
emotional nervous systems that they're going to
Um,
then imprint into. Yeah, it's not good.
yeah.
It's a bad scene, and so but I just think about that too. That the way that those impressions are made, right? Because and also it's just like how that function is actually working. So if you were able to type the parent, whoever's going to be the primary person, right? And it's like, okay, well, what kind of kids do these types of parents actually make? Which I think would be really fascinating.
I actually have noticed that, how do I want to say this? My instincts are telling me that if you plan to only have one kid, your kid is going to be a challenge for you based on your type. If you know you're going to have more than one, you may start out with an easy baby, and then one of your other kids is going to be that challenge type.
Me specifically, or
No, I'm the people that I have typed as parents who have children and like typing, like witnessing and experiencing, that's what I've noticed. There's usually, because we're here to teach lessons and learn from all engagement. So it's like
hmm,
it's really, at least that's what I've noticed is the pattern.
right.
I think a lot of parents will tell you there's that one kid that they just don't understand, and there it is. So
I made a new friend recently who has two kids kind of far apart. The first one was a boy, and it's just like Zen Buddha baby, just like super easy the whole time. And then the next child was like the problem child who just like exhibited all sorts of sort of
I, I would be
issues.
curious to know if the Buddha baby is my boyfriend's personality type, because he said he was like that as a kid.
Oh, I'll
So
find out and let you
I'm
know.
curious. I'm very curious. Well, and again, problem child. So here's the thing: are the parents both like introverts and
Right.
like easy? Because my brother is like like a ridiculous in the moment type, and like his kid is, bangs on drums, makes all kinds of racket. He loves that because it's like he's getting that stimuli. He likes that stimuli.
Hmm.
And the second baby was like very quiet. I was like, oh, are they gonna, have a problem with that kid that's quiet because it's not acting like the other one? I don't know.
Hmm.
So it does depend on the parents, like your expectations. And then go back to the guardians versus the artisan types. Like if you're two traditionalist or guardian parents who like kids who follow rules and listen to what you say and this and that, and you have an artisan kid, the kid's like, why? I just want to do what I want to do. I'm not gonna listen. Da, 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 da. And then like I know I would be traumatized if I had a kid, because guardian types literally as kids they ask if they are allowed to do things, if they can do things. They like literally have that compulsory need for rules and authority and structure. And they'll actually ask if they're allowed to deviate from the path. That would traumatize me as like a parent, because I'd be like, no, think for yourself. Like it's like so I don't know. Again, I think we have things that challenge us, and I think the universe kind of just does what we need to have. So
I also think it'd be cool just for the people in your own life if you could Yeah, we have a general sense about how they are, but like for like my own father or for the people in my family, it'd be interesting to know what their types are. So just to get a basic idea of how to interact with them and
Oh,
how
it's
to,
it's so helpful. I will tell it
right,
is so helpful. And that's what I actually did for my mom because my mom is such an outlier for my family for like us all being pretty aggressive T types. I have I actually made a chart for her and each one of the types I wrote everybody I knew that she knew and put them in the box so she could like navigate. And she said it's really helped her a lot. And then
wow,
what she does is once she knows what somebody's type is, then she can actually see those similar like traits and habits in somebody else and like kind of get a gist because she doesn't know the system because like she has issues with like that kind of stuff. So that's
right,
how she does it. She does it more on like just like a I guess intuitive like whatevering, and that's really helped her because
yeah.
she can notice like when somebody's going to do this or like that's a pattern of behavior. It is helpful. I have another friend that does the exact same thing. She's really not interested in learning the actual type
Right.
cognitive functions and everything, but she just
Yeah.
has her boxes and she's like, I know how to talk to this person. I'm like, oh, well, good. As long as you're getting some function out of it and it's helping you,
So
that's really all that matters.
one of the resources you steered me into was Personality Hacker.
Hmm.
And so they have a book, they have a test on their website,
Do they? Oh, yeah, they do.
they have a podcast, and they have a bunch of stuff on YouTube of the individual personality types, which is one of the ones I listened to like their nomenclature, the way they stack the personality functions. They have the driver in a car model
Yeah, I
thing,
don't
which
like that.
it's not
That's my only
bad.
complaint. Yeah, but once you get this, I feel like it convolutes things.
Yeah, why'd they have to do their own thing? It's just like, why can't you be like everybody else? But they are smart.
Trying to make it more like accessible, I think, in a
I
way.
Right.
do like that they have named each one of the cognitive functions as a word. Like, for example, the internal feeling they've titled authenticity versus the
Mm,
external feeling is harmony. You get a better sense of what that function kind
right.
of embodies.
Right.
I do like that, and I've actually kind of adopted that into my thing because I think that
Right.
helps some people. Um,
But I
I,
just
I-
had
I'll I'll give them that.
I skated through some of their material and through their YouTube, and I really like their stuff. And they have all the types sort of like broken down. They have like 20 or 30-minute videos just that kind of talk about that. And so that's
Mhm.
what I would kind of encourage people. I took their test. I tested as something else. I don't remember what it was. And it
What
was
did you
just
test as?
I don't know. I wrote it down somewhere.
The letters confuse you.
Uh, it was INFP is
INFP.
what,
Okay. So that one and the one you actually are have the same dominant function and
right?
inferior function. So it got you close.
It was close. And there was only a handful of questions that I thought were a little bit kind of middling. And I'm like, yeah, I'm both of those.
Oh, I hate
Yeah.
those. And I feel like that's an artisan thing. Like when I take those tests, they're like, are you planning or do you like to live in the mode? I'm like, I like to do both.
Yeah,
So I'm
I like
like,
to
am
do
I in the
both.
middle? But I'm both. How is the middle both?
Yeah.
Like, why
It
can't
does.
it be a both?
And it's not a binary. It was like, yeah, it depends on the situation. I do both of those things. And so like
And I think that is a characteristic artisan thing because we are opportunists,
mm,
meaning it really depends on the search situation.
right. So
Like,
How
that was
about like just quickly for someone like me where I feel like the same about that, I'm like, yeah, in the moment it would depend. Like if I wanted to plan something or whether I wanted to be in the moment. But maybe that is dependent on a certain function.
you do have the SE function, which is the artisan function in your ego
Oh, I
type.
do. Okay, that makes a lot of
oh,
sense to me.
that's why you're so
And there are
floppity
certain
floppy.
patterns with that. Like people who have the FI and TE functions in their ego, they tend to be a lot more like they have that vindictive aspect. I find they are more prone to being narcissists. Like if they're have the narcissistic thing going on, they're a lot more concerned with status and their reputation. And it's just like the way that it feeds into it. And they have this aura of like it's good versus bad and like what other people think thing. So it's like that the pairings kind of create these specific behaviors or ways of thinking that like for me, I guess because I've been doing this for 8 years, um, they're
Man.
so blatant. Yeah, it's been a heck of a rabbit hole and I'm still learning
Oh,
things. But it's I've noticed that like they'll actually be more prone to specific coping mechanisms and possibly certain trauma responses like higher FI users, external or internal feelers, they tend to do the disassociation thing.
mm.
um versus like an high SE user being like a hedonistic, like give me as much stimuli as possible
That's
type
you?
thing. Oh yeah. Are you serious?
Hey, which one am I? I think I'm also that. Am I that? I like experiences.
Yeah, you don't have FI.
Yeah, I like experiences.
You, Nick, have both, so I don't know which way you go. I think it would
I go
depend.
implosion as
But I will
usually.
tell you, like, your type is usually like a gambler and an alcoholic, I think,
Yeah.
when they go. Like,
I can't
they're
drink,
So maybe
so
just addictive stuff,
yeah,
like
they're
into
very addicted. Like, I would
processes.
say they're
yeah.
probably harder addicts.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
love drugs, but
numbing, they numb,
numbing,
they
yeah.
disassociate. Yeah, the
So
FI.
like,
Dissociation,
why
strong
would that
dissociation.
be though? Like, why would that be that they do
So
that?
my theory is because they're
Feeling
so
so much.
connected to their feelings that when they feel bad, it's too much and they have to disconnect.
Yeah, it's like being tortured, like actually physically tortured
Mm.
when the feeling gets past a certain point. It is like torture.
And because they have access to it, it's like you have access to all of your feelings in that moment when that starts happening, I would assume. And it's very like intense.
Well,
Um,
it's like maybe like last weekend I tried to just hang with it, and it was just like, oh, you want to see how high this balloon can go, or how tight the clamp can get, like
and that's
between.
interesting because I think Personality Hacker in the podcast that was talking about internal feeling, they talk about how they only the height of the feeling only lasts for 7 minutes.
Oh,
I would think what you just said
bullshit.
contradicts that. I would
Yeah.
say for me though, since I actually have that same function in my very last preference, mine burn bright and then I'm like, I'm over this. I'm like moving on.
Huh.
Well, but the thing that we're not taking into account is like unconscious resistance to feeling those feelings. So
True.
if
Right.
you're in an environment where you're emotionally shamed or rejected or abandoned, then there's probably an internal function or a part of you that's suppressing the emotion, which like what you resist persist.
Yeah.
So it's causing that persistent like tug of
Yes.
war inside, which makes sense to me. It would just feel like shit and it would just be like internal war.
Well, and the other thing I was thinking too, that very well may be a sign of trauma, because if you don't realize that what you're experiencing is actually triggering that like catalyst of pulling that trauma up, because when you are actually experiencing your trauma, you don't realize that you're not actually seeing reality. You're re-experiencing that trauma. So it
Mm.
feels real, but it's not actually real.
Yeah.
And then if your dominant function is that like in-depth feeling of your emotions, like
Yeah.
you get like the triple whammy of like the perfect storm. And I can I honestly understand why they need to disassociate and numb if that's what they're experiencing. um
I would say absolutely. And
yeah.
because I have been playing around with this now for the last 5 years, it is, and like what happened last weekend, it is all trauma because my internal perspective changes absolutely. But I've been on the ride so many times, it is like taking drugs. It's like that perspective is completely warped. It sees the world completely differently.
Mm.
And then, um, I don't know, but in that like traumatized zone, like, and like maybe the dynamics of trauma are a little bit different because they're not. It's not a flowing system that's flowing correctly. It's something that's stuck.
Yes.
Uh, um, it lasts longer than 7 minutes.
Carmela, you were talking about how to develop like certain functions to like what might help somebody like Nick with that? Like what might he develop to be able to
Well, one of the things I read from mine was that it was like the external balancing with external.
Developing
Like
your second function to help balance that top one.
right.
Yeah, they talk about that.
I don't know what my second function is.
So what?
External sensing.
Yeah, external sensing. So that's getting in touch with reality to help you get out of that
Right. So,
emotional.
right. And so, like this weekend, instead of staying home alone and doing the exact same thing, I just went out and hung out with people, which was just to get out of my head, get with other people,
mm,
experience the world, just do things.
I think that's good too, but I think at its full sense, like getting in something that actually like engages the five senses, like uh yoga. I don't know if you do yoga, but like I would actually get in like mud and get in there and be like really, really focusing on like the textures and the
Mm,
feel, and like that's what they talk about by fully immersing in external sensing, is like literally being in and immersed in reality.
Mm.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, I did the next best thing and I went golfing.
Sniffing. I don't know if you lick mud, but I would lick mud.
Yeah, I lick a lot
Or
of
like
mud.
a spa, a
I
mud
stick
bath, aroma
I
oils.
stick so much stuff in my mouth. I don't know if that's part of my type, but like it's part of my categorizing. Like it's hilarious. But we were talking about, I guess, the emotions, and depending where your emotion, I think I kind of hinted at that, because I've noticed that my awareness of my feelings is my very last preference or last concern. It literally has done this like boiling pot scenario where like it gets to a point where some really tiny small thing pops or puts too much pressure that the thing explodes, and then I become this like crazy freaking emotional projecting psycho. I'm so venomous, I am so ridiculous, like it is scary to be around. And it's because I don't deal with like those emotions, but it's because that's like my last focus. So if you think about it from the bandwidth perspective, if you have 8 functions and that's your last preference, by the time you finally get to that process, you have no more bandwidth to give it. So it just keeps not being attentive, but eventually it does blow over. And that's very detrimental for F. So what I've actually started doing for me, because I'm a systems based like logic thinker, I've actually created that I've actually forced myself to start noticing when I'm feeling something. And I actually like dig and start thinking about like what that actual feeling is, and I define it. And then I go and I research what that feeling actually is. And I really, really dig into it. And I'm like, okay, so like for example, what's the one I did that I thought was really interesting? Resentment. So I was feeling resentment. Like I got like they have this like emotion chart where it has like the 4 emotions, like happy, sad, angry,
Right.
like the
Yeah.
really like tiny. And I'm like, oh, that's my attentional like bandwidth. But then I realized like there's like a deeper layer and a deeper layer. So I've been really focusing and trying to like actually differentiate on a minute level. And that was where I came up with what word did I just use?
Resentment.
Resentment.
Yeah.
So I was feeling resentment towards my dad about just like constantly changing plans and all this and that. And I looked it up. And when I was talking about the fact that most resentment stems from basically a betrayal to yourself because you
Mm.
allowed it to happen.
Mm.
When I sat there and I thought about it, I didn't sit in my feelings because it's not my dominant, but I thought about it. I was like, that makes a lot of sense. So for me, the way my personality works, knowing that, but not actually feeling that, I can at least link that feeling then with that cause, and then catch myself when it's happening and be like, oh, this is what I'm doing. I need to set a boundary, or I need to make a better choice. So that's how I use my emotion, or I've started to like tap into that to keep those boiling emotions from being ridiculous. It's been difficult, but I'm creating a system for myself. I
Yeah,
don't.
but instead of just being a big morass of like, a big pot of just all these things meshed together with no defining lines, you now are beginning, well, 8 years in, it's becoming more clear about seeing how things link together, like seeing what you go to first, seeing what you go to last, and knowing that like you have to take care of those things, and knowing like what tools to bring to bear
I was
when
gonna
you
say, but
need
you
to.
can use your strengths to actually process
Right,
the ones you're not good with
right,
and use it in a productive way. You just have to think about things a little bit different, or feel things a little bit different, or like
right.
perceive things a little bit different. But it like you can use your strengths to actually help with your weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting.
That's pretty cool.
That's
It's
very
very
cool.
cool.
So, Carmela, do you have any like offerings or things that you're working on?
Um, I want to get into coaching like from a fulfillment base, because this isn't even like the entirety of what I want to be teaching. I actually want to be teaching people how to go from basically broken and non-functional to fulfilled, happy, and like ultimate potential. And this is just a piece of like a system that's encompassing some human needs, and this is in the identity category. I'm working on building a blog, but I have a lot to like mesh out. But if you are interested in any of this, you can always reach out to me on Facebook. Like I will help anybody and everybody, because just want everybody to like have better lives. And if I don't have my system like up and together, I'm working as I go. And it may honestly unfold that I'm just do it as I need with people I'm working with until it actually gets all done. It's kind of what I've noticed is happening because I'm kind of a like interest-based person as an artisan, and I am like, oh, shiny object. Oh, I want to be doing this right now. Oh, I lost interest in that. I want to do this right now. But like I need the freedom to do that or I hate life. So it's a little hard for me. I'm trying to work with it, but I'll get there. But I do really want to be doing this because I've just seen how much this is helping people, how much like my mom is like an entirely different person. I can't even I can't even explain. Like it's amazing. And I have a couple other people that are letting me actually work with their kids and stuff. So I'm really curious to see what we can unfold because I'm hoping to actually get to parents and like child nurturing in a more like productive way so that kids don't have to like find themselves at 40. They can like find themselves at 12. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? And then
Start
actually
working on
create
it.
a life
Right.
that they want versus like realizing they screwed up and then they have to like unprogram themselves, reprogram themselves the way they're supposed to be, and then find what they actually like. So that's what I'm hoping to do.
That's
Um,
great.
but not everybody's like, yay, play with my kids. But I have a couple people that are into that. But I have a lot more people that are just interested in like figuring them out too. So,
Right.
and then the relationship thing, like I can't even tell you how this helps, like with relationships, with parent child, with sibling, like interactions, with friends. I will say, if you find somebody that's the same personality type as you, it is like you don't even have to think about like kid gloving it or changing how you are to just like work and know and understand each other. It's phenomenal. And like I've gone through my life like wanting a friend that understands me, and I just found two females that are like very similar to my type. They're the extrovert version, and it is like it's so easy. I literally cannot even tell you how easy it is. It's amazing. Like, oh, it's great.
That's awesome.
And my mom just found one that's very similar to her too. And she's just like, I'm like, she looks like she's literally excited like a kid. And I just like, she's so happy. And like the like traumatized child in me, I was upset and resentful and like whatever. But like, I'm happy for her because it's like, I know what that kind of connection feels like now. And I'm glad she found somebody that like it's easy and she has that with. So it's like,
Right.
and you can
Yeah.
differentiate too, like so it's interesting. I've come a long way in a lot of aspects, and it was funny because my mom used to tell me how I should be more tolerant of people and compassionate and like all this stuff, and like I was like screw them, they're all stupid, whatever whatever. But I will tell you, learning this system, it just unfolded now that I have more compassion, I have more appreciation of different people's perspectives and stuff. Like it just naturally unfolded that way
Well,
because
I
Mm.
now
think
I understand they think different, and that's not that they're stupid, it's that they excel in different areas that I don't understand.
well, it's so it's so normal for human beings. It's just the way everybody does it. Whenever you imagine somebody, you imagine yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mhm.
And that just
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work.
Does not work.
Right. You're like, why aren't you behaving or doing what you should be doing based on my understanding of the
Right.
world? You're a fucking
Doesn't that
idiot.
make sense?
Yeah.
But then it's like, oh, they have a different operating system and they have a different, and men and women have different like hormones. And it's just like,
Well, they actually have different brain too.
yeah,
Yeah.
different brain. So it's just like when you understand that no one's really like misbehaving, as
Yeah,
Allison
Right.
no.
Young or I
So
think
much more
Brene Brown would
compassion to be
say.
had for people to like understand that there are differences.
And seriously, like even if you don't, once you learn the system, you can't go back. Like I can't like, I'm like, oh, they're not dumb, they're just like good at emotional stuff and just not great with data. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll put if it's okay with you, I'll put your Facebook in the description, which
Yeah.
is yeah. And then I'll some of the books we talked about last time, we actually recorded this once before.
Yeah, we did. We went
Yeah,
way
we
too
did.
technical. Had to
We
redo
went
it.
out- So we're just trying to get, but I'll put some of those authors and those titles in there if people are interested just to dive into,
Hmm.
some experts in this stuff. And so
Yeah,
we'll
and
just
if
try.
if you're if you really don't want to get into the nitty gritty, but you want a quick and easy way to identify people, look into the Lyndon Berens interaction style book and the Kiersey temperament book. Like
Yeah.
it'll blow your mind.
Yeah. Anyway,
Blow your
Very cool.
mind.
It's very
Carmela,
cool to like learn about the system. So thank you,
Mhm.
Carmela.
thank you for your time
You're
and for your
welcome.
sharing. And
I
thank
hope
you,
this
Angela.
helps some people.
You got anything more, Angela, before we go?
No, I think we covered it, and we know that we could talk for hours on this, like because we have.
Because we have.
We're
Well,
Right.
maybe
Thanks.
maybe we could maybe if we
over our time, aren't we?
well yeah, we're wrapping up. But like
Okay.
we know
We could
you.
do
We can always
another
come
one
back. We can
down.
Oh, I
always,
was gonna
that's what
say if you guys are actually interested in like deep diving in one of the different sections, like by all
Yeah.
means, I will come back on. I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
It is like
Yeah.
my boyfriend
I
hates it.
I love just hearing about the transformational stories. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
Yeah.
that's the idealist in me, but I'm just like, but I think if you can help another human understand themselves, have more compassion for themselves, have more compassion for other people, like find their place in the world, like, isn't that what we all want? Just to
Right.
Yes.
feel like
Yes.
seen and heard and connected and have a
And that
sense of intimacy.
significance and the self-esteem aspect that come along with that. Oh my God. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Right.
Yeah. It's like,
Helping the world in any little way get better. Right?
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's priceless, truly priceless, that kind of thing. So
Sweet.
I love it.
All right.
Thank you.
Everybody, thank you. So emotional. Number 20. I think I don't know. Number is so emotional. Out.
20 something.
20
Bye,
something.
everyone.
Bye.